Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is one of the last sessions of APLN-led sessions on nuclear issues. There is another session going on somewhere in another room. So thank you all for coming. My name is Naima Sortuya, and the topic of this session will be the challenges before the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons ahead of its 10th Review Conference in 2020. As you all know, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT, was adopted in 1968, and it had entered into force in 1970, which means that in 2020, when its 10th conference is held, we will be marking the 50 years since its entry into force. The NPT is renowned for its near universal membership. There are only a few countries that remain outside of it, just 5 countries, I believe, and it's also credited for having been an effective instrument for preventing the spread of nuclear weapons. In fact, there are today only 5 nuclear weapon states, legally speaking. But if we do the counting, there are 9 nuclear armed states all in all. So ahead of the NPT is based on what has been called 3 pillars: disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy. But we won't be talking much about the peaceful uses today, but rather about the challenges in the implementation of the goals of non-proliferation and disarmament. And I would suggest that we have a panel of brilliant experts on this issue, and I'll introduce the panel starting from Ambassador Abe here to my left and going further to my left. So Ambassador Abe is currently serves as Commissioner of the Japan Atomic Energy Commission. And in 2003 and 2006, he served as Under-Secretary General of the United Nations for Disarmament Affairs. He's held prominent positions in the Japanese diplomacy over his career. And we also have another Under-Secretary General of the UN, who's until very recently served in this capacity as a High Representative for Disarmament Affairs at the UN. And Ambassador Kim has also served in various capacities in the Foreign Ministry and at the Office of the President of South Korea, dealing with the security and nuclear issues. And then for the left, I have Rakesh Sood, who is a columnist and a writer on foreign and security affairs. Mr. Sood has served as permanent representative of India to conference on disarmament in Geneva, and has also held the positions at the Foreign Ministry of India, and also served as special envoy of the Prime Minister for on disarmament and non-proliferation. Ambassador Cha Kang is another former Under-Secretary General of the United Nations, but not for disarmament affairs, but for economic and social affairs. But Ambassador Cha has a vast experience working in multilateral institutions and on dealing with complex issues at various international conferences. And Ambassador Cha has also served as permanent representative of China to the UN office at Geneva. And then we also have John Talman, who is a former Australian diplomat, who has also had a brilliant career in the Australian diplomacy, serving, among other things, as special assistant to the Director General of the IAEA. So what I would suggest is to proceed in 3 blocks of issues, which I have identified as 3 big challenges before the NPT ahead of its 2020 review conference. So the first group of issues will be related to disarmament, and the second to non-proliferation, and the third to the general security environment, both regional and international, which affect which I think will affect the success or failure of the coming review conference. So disarmament, I would suggest that we everybody take turns and speak for 5 minutes on disarmament challenges, the non-proliferation challenge, and the security challenges. And regarding disarmament, I think I would ask you all to take your turns and comment on the ban treaty, because this is related to the NPT in very important ways, because the very fact that the ban treaty negotiations are taking place is a consequence of the failure of the NPT to advance this important pillar of the NPT, which is nuclear disarmament. So I would like you all to comment on this process as part of your discussion on disarmament challenges. And then I see that we have here on the panel all representatives of countries that have not been supportive of the negotiations. China, obviously, a nuclear weapon state, which abstained. India, a nuclear armed state, which abstained, and 3 umbrella states who voted against the UN resolution. So I would be interested in your perspectives on the ban treaty as in the context of the disarmament challenges before the NPT. Okay, why don't you start, John? Yeah. The disarmament challenges, including the ban treaty.
So we do it one by one?
Yeah, you do it one by one, and I would ask you to take 5 minutes each, and then engage in discussion and respond to any views that you...
Disarmament, non-proliferation.
Yeah, I'll ask you then to discuss non-proliferation.
But each one takes 5 minutes.
Yeah, each one takes
25 minutes for one subject.
Yeah, that's good.
Three subjects, then we exhaust the time.
It's okay.
Okay.
We'll value your expertise.
I think everybody will run away.
Okay. Well, look, thank you, too, for that introduction and for the setting of the scene. If our focus is to be on the challenges at the moment, I would like to start by turning the thing upside down and saying, yes, there are a lot of challenges, but the thing that needs to be stated first and foremost is that the NPT is still a treaty that everybody wants. And not only the members of the treaty, it includes all countries, to my mind, perhaps with one exception, DPRK. And let me explain why. First and foremost, you've got those nuclear weapon states, the butt of all our efforts at the moment. But of course, they are keen supporters of the NPT. Their situation is protected in a way there quite comfortably. That was a treaty they negotiated 50 years ago, and they're still, by and large, happy with the framework it's provided. Then there are the advocates of the nuclear ban treaty, and we'll come back to this in greater detail, but let me just make the point that at that last meeting, the first meeting on the ban treaty, and again at the NPT review conference, PrepCom, it was very clear that the supporters of the ban treaty do not want to do anything to undermine the strength of the NPT. Of course, then if you come to the non-aligned movement, if you can call it a movement of any form of coherence, yes, there are a number of people, a number of countries in the non-aligned movement who would like to use the NPT to further their own ends. But of course, if that treaty wasn't value to so many, it would not provide the leverage that can be obtained by exploiting the NPT to pursue other issues. So if the NPT was not valued highly by everybody, you wouldn't be able to even pretend to make progress, for example, on issues like the Middle East in that context. It just wouldn't provide the leverage. And then what used to be known as the holdout states, we don't use that term anymore, I don't think, but the India and Pakistan in particular, I would argue it is very much in their interest to support the NPT. Clearly their security interests are in favour of restraining, preventing further proliferation. It would not enhance their security situation at all if that were to happen. So, in fact, I think the argument could be made for the non-NPT states to commit to act as if they were parties to the NPT. It would be in their and our interest. And there's a model for that. France, back in the 80s, made such an undertaking to act as if it was a party to the NPT, and it acted in that manner for quite some time before it actually joined the NPT. So I wanted to start with just setting the scene for why the suggestion that the NPT is about to fade away or cease to be in people's interest, I think is just fundamentally wrong. And if, I'm sorry, Paul Meyer is not in the room, because I think his view that the NPT is in some final stages is wrong. Of course, it has challenges. I don't think I need to go through the list of challenges. It is the lack of movement on Article 6. Fundamentally, I think the proliferation challenges, we can come back to that, but I think they're manageable. And there's the Article 4 stuff, which people used to worry about. I think these days that sort of ceases to be a huge issue. And then there's nuclear security. The biggest challenge, I think, has been a self-made challenge by virtue of the efforts and commitments that were made in '95 and subsequently to get the indefinite extension. Yes, there are major issues there because big commitments were made and they have not been lived up to. But this is not about the fundamentals of the NPT, to my mind.
Ambassador, yeah.
Oh.
Yes, please. Oh.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Since I noticed that not many people are here, the majority of the listeners here on the floor are the APL members. Since I've said so much about this NPT non-proliferation, I don't want to repeat it. Perhaps I will say something else. Firstly, I would say NPT, in spite of all kind of gossips and complaints and weaknesses, I think it served the interests of the peace and security of the world. And I would emphasize that without NPT, I think the world will be much worse. Much worse. This is my firm view, and it is cornerstone for nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation. So, that said, since we are I'm asked to comment on nuclear disarmament, we all know why those gossips, why this negotiations, the ban of nuclear weapons. And basically, the member states to the NPT are not happy about the progress made in the nuclear disarmament. It's very clear, because on the 3 pillars, I think disarmament, because most of the NPT members, non-nuclear weapon states, they have complied with their commitments by not producing nuclear weapons, while the nuclear weapon countries have not done their job properly, or have failed to meet the expectations of the international society. So, but that said, we should also acknowledge the fact that there have been some progress. For example, the bilaterally between the 2 nuclear superpowers, START 1, START 2 concluded, the new START is in the process. INF have been implemented. You know, there have been some, but not big enough. Because those 2 guys, 2 nuclear weapon countries, they have over 90%, I'm not very sure, 92 or 95% of world total of nuclear weapons. So therefore, other nuclear weapon countries are looking to them to take the lead, which was agreed upon many times in the General Assembly. So, of course, the slow progress of the nuclear disarmament by the two should not become an excuse for any other nuclear weapon countries not to take any action. Now, this is right, but the fact of the matter is that, international security, international community, including, the rest of the nuclear weapon countries are looking up to the two to do more, and that will facilitate their efforts. Now, but multilaterally, I think we should be fair to say that there have been some progress, and particularly in the nuclear field, because forget biological, forget chemical, forget others. Let's say, what about CTBT? And it's a huge issue, not because I was chief negotiator, spent many years on that. Without CTBT, I think you can imagine what would happen, in the world. So CTBT, otherwise we will lose our justifications to condemn or criticize the North Korea or whoever. Okay, so we reckon, while recognizing some progress in the nuclear field, I think we should really encourage those guys, particularly nuclear countries, to do more. Number one, how to do it, of course, is through the ban. Now, ban, I can understand. My government abstained because, as I understand, I interpret Chinese government policy. I'm not in the government anymore. We have a mixed feelings towards the ban of nuclear weapons. Mixed in the sense that, understandable, it should be banned and should be destroyed, all nuclear weapons. But through a ban like this, can we achieve it? Now, this is a question. This is a question. I'm not sure. We are not sure. And my conviction, my argument is that no, you can never succeed through a ban only. No, we understand that it must, but it is ultimate approach. The objective takes that we have time. Let's stop the qualitative improvement of the nuclear weapons through test ban treaty, and let's stop the quantitative kind of build-up through the fissile material cut-off treaty like this, and along with many other measures. This is the way. While at the same time, member states to the NPT, non-nuclear weapon states, also comply with the non-proliferation obligation, which have been doing. So anyway, those are the comments. Sorry, I'm taking up a lot of time, and for the time being, that's my comment.
Thank you. Rakesh, can I also ask you to comment on whether this ban treaty would mean that there will be a new legal regime? We talk about the non-proliferation regime in relation to the NPT, but will there be a disarmament regime of sorts with the ban treaty?
Thank you. There is a saying that if we don't diagnose the illness correctly, we can never prescribe the right medicine. So let's go back and see. And as you said, the NPT was negotiated on the basis of 3 pillars, and the non-proliferation, the disarmament, and peaceful cooperation, the cooperation for peaceful purposes. Now, if you look at the disarmament pillar, notwithstanding whatever my good friend Shah has said, the fact is that none of the bilateral agreements, like he talked about SALT or START or anything like that, were negotiated under the NPT. So whatever bilateral arms control has taken place, has actually taken place outside the framework of the NPT, the INF and so on. And for about half century, 2020 will mark 50 years of the NPT. I think in 50 years, we've had, this will be the 10th review conference. So in addition to Article 6, which is there in the NPT, We have had 9 review conferences, some of which have adopted final declarations, with many paragraphs devoted to nuclear disarmament. If we put all those paragraphs together, they come to about 15 pages. And I don't think, other than reiterating the objectives of Article 6, they have frankly not succeeded. And why it has remained like this is, I think, that is precisely the reason why you see the beginning of the humanitarian initiative, the ban negotiations, and so on. I don't think that these necessarily weaken the NPT. I think the NPT has 190 member states, and as was said by John, everybody finds virtue in it. So I don't think it necessarily weakens the NPT. But I do think that it shines the spotlight on a fundamental weakness of the NPT, and it is vital that we recognize it. At least the NPT member states it is their duty and their obligation to themselves to recognize it. And I think in the previous session, at the conclusion, Ramesh made a very valid point. Article 6 obligation is not just meant for the 5 nuclear weapon states that are party to the NPT. And unless all member states, which includes the non-nuclear member states, unless they are also prepared to accept this fundamental flaw and therefore accept that there is a breach in terms of obligations under Article 6, the NPT will not become an instrument for promoting nuclear disarmament either in 2020 or thereafter. And that's precisely why you have the movement towards a ban. Now, whether the ban will create a new legal regime or not is very difficult to say at this stage. But this ban certainly has the seeds within it to be able to work towards a new nuclear regime. Let me tell you, I'll close with a small story. There was a king in India many hundreds of years ago, and he had a big court, and he had a number of wise men in that court. And he was fond of posing different kinds of puzzles to his courtiers. So one day he came to the court, and his name was Akbar, and he drew a line like this on the ground. And he said, I want you to make it shorter without rubbing it out. And so everybody was puzzled. And they said, well, how do we do that? And till this wise man, Birbal, he came, and he drew another line next to it which was longer than that. And voila, the earlier line got shortened as a result. So, in sum, I would say the NPT has reached the limits of its success. It can't go any further. It can't do disarmament. And therefore, you will have to draw a second line which is longer than the NPT if we want to achieve the goal of nuclear disarmament.
Thank you. Ambassador Kim, your perspective.
Thank you. I'd like to start by picking up Rakesh's last point. I very much agree. These two lines will be drawn, but I hope these two lines will go together for quite significant time until the new line proves its legal utility. Okay. Because I don't want to lose a legal mechanism which has worked for last over 45 years without knowing how the new legal regime to be created will reinforce it. So that's the first point I want to make. And also, I very much agree with the diagnosis of Rakesh and also Ambassador Shah, because we have to admit significant achievements have been made. Because if we compare the number of nuclear arsenal available now to that of heights of the Cold War, it is a significant reduction. But the problem we have now is there's nothing on the horizon going beyond 2021. So it is incumbent on the two largest nuclear possessors to show they are engaging with each other, there will be a real movement again going beyond 2021, and that negotiation has to start from next year. So without showing it again about the relevance, utility of Article 6 of the MPT will be put in a serious doubt. So that leadership has to be revived. And the third point I want to make is about another issue which is also related to the pattern of past reviews, 9 reviews. We have about half and half, maybe 4 or 5 outcomes and 4 absence of outcomes. We call it failures. And if we look at the recent pattern, 2005 we have failure, 2010 we have an outcome, 2015 we have another failure. So I hope 2020 we'll have a success, but it is not given. That's the problem. It requires hard work and the change of attitude on the part of, I agree with Rakesh's point, of every player. Not only nuclear weapon states, but also non-nuclear weapon states. And also it requires greater sort of unity of purpose among P5. Because the one trend I'm worried, which is also increasingly evident not only in the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, but also even at the NPT review PRACOM process in Vienna, that the nuclear weapon states are criticizing each other. And P5 mechanism has not been able to produce any tangible roadmap ahead. And then it will drive the hardliners on the other side of among non-nuclear weapon states to push the alternative tracks further away from each other. So it requires more concerted efforts between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states, but among nuclear weapon states first. So that's the third point I want to make. And the fourth point I want to highlight is Middle East free zone of weapons of mass destruction. 2010 outcome contains a very detailed action plan, both on nuclear disarmament, but also nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. But simply, it was not implemented. So credibility of the process is now being questioned. And unless the nuclear weapon states, particularly those 3 co-sponsors of the Middle East resolution in 1995, engage with the countries in the region more proactively and earlier rather than later, we may have the repeat of what happened in 2015, meaning that those who are reluctant on nuclear disarmament may feel comfortable with hiding behind Middle East free zone issue to hijack the whole outcome. So we should not allow that to happen again. And that requires, again, early engagement by the 3 co-sponsors supported by the UN. Because 2010 outcome, say, 4 conveners, 3 co-sponsors plus UN. But still, countries in the region have serious differences remaining about the agenda and modalities of the conference, but as well as about the UN's role. So the UN as one of the 4 co-conveners, but still the parties in the region couldn't agree what role UN should play, both in the preparatory process and the conference itself. So those issues need to be tackled early on I hope this year, not waiting for next year, because the 2012 we started the process, but it is 2 years late. It has to be started right after 2010 outcome was adopted. So I hope this time we'll not lose crucial time again, so that otherwise next year we'll have a very crowded agenda coming up. And I hope three co-sponsors will exercise leadership starting from this year.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Well,
Ambassador Abe.
there have been 4 panelists already given all the statements, so enough backgrounds have been provided. So I just add some specific points I want to emphasize. As to the nuclear disarmament, as of today, the Nuclear Weapons Ban Convention negotiation is key. But on this question, there have been serious division of views. One side says, well, nuclear disarmament can only go step by step, and involving those countries who have nuclear weapons. Otherwise, cannot make practical progress. The other side said, it may be so, but there has been no progress in step-by-step approach. U.S.-Russia negotiations have been stalled for some time. The CTBT, the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, has been there for more than 20 years, but it has not come into force. FMCT negotiation of a treaty to stop production of fissile material to make nuclear weapons has not started after more than 20 years since it has been proposed and once agreed to start. Therefore, I think practically the way out of this strong confrontation is to show that those step-by-step approach is working. It doesn't make sense. We are not in favor of negotiations because we think step-by-step approach is better. But when the step-by-step approach is not working, you lose your force of persuasion. So practical step, I think, is to let those practical steps move forward. One example is CTBT, a treaty to stop nuclear tests. Good treaty has not been in force for 20 years. Let's move that, for example. That can tell the people who are desperately working on ban treaty, now things are starting to move, so we can be more accommodating of the views on the other side. So I think that is critical for the 2020 review conference. Another important question to make 2020 conference success is Middle East question that Ambassador Kim mentioned. There's no denying that the Middle East question has been one of the most contentious issue in the review conference. And if it doesn't go smoothly, that may destroy the next review conference. So it is important that we show that progress is being made on this question. Basically, one side argues we need to have a peaceful international environment conducive to have such a zone banning all weapons of mass destruction. The other side says countries in the region has to agree to give up nuclear weapons in the first place and accept verification that they don't have any. I don't agree with either one. If you have to wait for peaceful, favorable international environment to come, you may never have free zone. to give up nuclear weapons as a result of Free Zone Treaty is an end result, not the condition at the beginning. So accepting those views, they should start practical discussions, how to start discussions for international conference. Thank you.
Why don't we talk about the non-proliferation challenges before the NPT? I want you to briefly describe what needs to be done to strengthen the non-proliferation toolkits available. What areas would you emphasize as needing more attention on the part of individual countries and the international community? Meaning the specific institutions which should be working towards the strengthening these non-proliferation toolkits. We talked a lot about the North Korea and Korean Peninsula. I thought maybe we should be talking more about those instruments that are supposed to promote the strengthening of the non-proliferation regime. Why don't you start, John? Maybe you start, or maybe...
Okay, happy to. Again, I'd make the first point is that it has been a remarkably successful regime to date, and having worked 6 years in the IAEA, I might be regarded as an unreliable witness, but it seemed to me that the agency has performed quite an amazing service to the global community, which has been reflected in the Nobel Peace Prize award. When I first sort of got involved in events in Vienna back in the late 80s, there was very much an attitude to the verification regime that if it's not shown to you, it doesn't exist. Countries were expected to be honest, they were expected to provide the reports, and if the numbers tallied, no further questions were asked. The first very big shock was when it became apparent that DPRK was not adhering to the rules, and Iraq was not adhering to the rules. Let me focus on the DPRK case because it was really quite a remarkable day in the Board of Governors at the IAEA when one member state provided the evidence, and the evidence wasn't written, it was in the form of slides on a screen showing a hole in the ground, showing that hole in the ground being filled with concrete and made into a facility, that facility operating and demonstrating heat and blah, blah, blah for a number of years. Then that hole in the ground being covered up with a mound of earth, then trees being planted on top of it, and an artillery piece put on top of that. And the board was told that that was a military site, or the agency was told that that was a military site, therefore no questions could be asked about it. Well, of course, questions were asked about it, and that particular site turned out to be a waste disposal site from the reprocessing plant at Yongbyon. So this was a very a dramatic change in the whole approach that the international community was taking to the whole question of verification and to safeguards. And then we launched into the program which was known at the time 93+2, but the strengthened safeguards regime, which led to the additional protocol. And that is quite a radically intrusive system of verification. And what we've seen further evolve, I think, through the Iran case, is even yet the options for being able to be very intrusive to ensure that the assurance that we want to have from the verification activities is absolute. And that's what's required these days. Near enough is no longer good enough. It's got to be absolute in any small. And part of this is terribly powerful scientific techniques for identifying breaches. Of course, the more it's a cat and mouse game. The more you progress on the forensic side, the cleverer the ones who want to deceive can be, and they can try and clean up laboratories and whatever else. And we saw that in the case of Syria, where the regime, when the Israelis took out the facility in Syria. But it was quite clear that despite every effort to clear away all the evidence, that there was enough, just grains rather than grams of contaminated material to indicate that there had been an activity which was clearly nuclear, and that the origin of that was certainly a particular country. And it was never quite nailed completely, but the evidence was pretty compelling. So I would say that one thing is on the verification side of the non-proliferation regime, it's very strong. Other sides not being quite so effective, and the sanctions have been one, taking in, particularly, again, our neighbour to the north here. And the work that the Security Council has done on that has perhaps been rather patchy. The take-up has been patchy. There's been some improvement recently. But certainly, I think it's probably fair to say that the Security Council's efforts have not been quite as comprehensive or as well forced through as they might have been. But I think, again, we're learning how the Security Council can do these things. There's not much history there to go back on, so a lot of this has been invented as we go along. But there are other, if I can just to complete the picture, of course, it's not just the things that we see in the public domain. Countries are using their national means to verify that countries are meeting up to their obligations. We have the export control regimes which contribute, and we have various codes of practice, some of them voluntary, some are not, which all add up to a very sophisticated, I think, framework for managing the regime.
Okay, thank you very much. Ambassador Shah, maybe you could describe the situation where we are in terms of the nuclear security and the prevention of nuclear terrorism. Why don't you comment on this, if possible?
Yes. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I'm not expert on the nuclear security and the matters, but let me first say on the non-proliferation issue, non-proliferation aspect. I think the treaty has been extremely successful in the sense of prevention, on the issue of the prevention of the proliferation, in the framework of NPT per se, because India and Pakistan, they are not parties to the NPT. So on the part of the nuclear open countries, I think they have been doing well. They have not proliferated any technology or anything as far as I know. On the part of the non-nuclear open countries, state parties, they have, as I said in my earlier interventions, I said they complied with their obligations. So in that sense, that is why I would say NPT is important. It has done a lot of a good job. Now, issue today. My colleague and everybody knows we have two big hot issues all in our continent. And the Korean issue, nuclear issue, it's huge, most important issue, I think. Now we have so much having said. Well, I do not agree my compatriots' view, you know, in the previous session, discussing about non-first use or that. You know, I think this issue should not be raised even. North Korea is not a nuclear weapon country. There is unanimous agreement or decision by the whole international community, without exception, that Korea Peninsula should be denuclearized. Peninsula means both north and south, and right now it's north. So to say that whether DPRK should have the right to, whether it be first or non-first use for DPRK, we are sending a really very dangerous message. We can tolerate. That means toleration. No, that's my comment outside. This is the Korean issue. All kind of means have been tried, but we have failed so far. Right now, the only way to address the issue is to comply with, to implement the relevant Security Council resolution. But the question on the implementation of that relevant resolution is that it is not implemented on the balanced way. So far, the Security Council resolution has two parts. Number one, first, sanction, to be a little bit simplistic. Number two, negotiation, peaceful means. But now we are all talking about sanctions. And on the sanctions, that it's China's job. If you don't do your job, then that's your problem. Well, that's the impression created. And forgetting the second part, negotiations. So this, I think comprehensive implementation of Security Council resolution is a way out. And I don't want to go through all the proposals on the table and with a softening or changes or improvement of the position of the U.S. and with the development in our coast country here. I think there are opportunities, and we should have at least some confidence on that. Another issue, of course, is the Iranian issue. It's really danger. It's very much related to the objective of this NPT. Non-proliferation. We all know, Iran is a party to it. We knew that there have been problems. We may argue differently, but we all agree it is an issue. That's why, explains why 6+1 negotiation, explains why the eventual conclusion of an agreement, which is also endorsed by the Security Council. Now, with the change of the government or administration in the United States, there is some risk. There is some risk. So what we can do? I think we should urge our friend on the other side of Pacific really take it seriously. If we failed, this agreement is not implemented in letter and spirit, then the repercussions will be very negative on that part of the world, which is already very, very hot, Middle East, and also certain effects under the issue of so-called nuclear weapon-free zone or zone free of all weapons of mass destruction, which successfully, unfortunately, blocked, our review council NPT. So those are my comments on the non-proliferation issue regarding the security, as a nuclear security, nuclear safety. Of course, I think I'm not expert on that, and I must admit this, but I think we, international community, have learned a lot of experiences, lessons from the incident from our neighbor Japan, and also and I think this touched off. I think it served as kind of warning. At least in my own country, we suspended the practice of the operations of many of the nuclear facilities and sat down and looked into it and checked everything, and we have come up with a set of new measures to ensure that facilities operations in China will be safe. So I'm sorry I cannot meet your expectations on this security and safety, but that has that much to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Rakesh?
Thank you. I agree with both John and Shah that the NPT has been very successful in tackling the issue of proliferation. But I would take it one step further and say that once again, it is a victim of its own success. It can't go any further because today You have India, Pakistan, Israel outside the NPT. You have South Sudan, which is not yet a party, but it's a new state, so presumably it will join at some stage. And you have North Korea, and the fact that we are not able to actually define the status of North Korea, because legally it has withdrawn from the NPT, so there is no, I mean, it should be said that, and it had the right to withdraw, and it withdrew in a legal fashion from the NPT. So, but it is, the NPT community is unwilling to even accept the fact that North Korea is a non-state party. And I think that reflects the fragility in the sense of what to do. And that's an essential weakness. So, and then if you look at future proliferation challenges, I think my friend here, Shah, spoke about North Korea. We've talked about, how do we even acknowledge the existence of North Korea? Is it inside or outside, somewhere in between? Shah talked about Iran. Now, once again, if we look at Iran, Iran has always maintained that it has never said it wants to quit the NPT. It wants to exercise its rights, which it feels are legitimate rights within the NPT. So a negotiation has taken place, and an agreement called the JCPOA has been concluded. Where was this concluded? It was not concluded in the NPT. It was concluded outside the NPT, P5+1. So clearly, even in tackling today's proliferation threats, the NPT becomes irrelevant. And that is what the JCPOA negotiation shows. And why does that happen? Because the NPT was negotiated 50 years ago. And at that time, nuclear technology was still a fairly new technology. Today, after 70 years, I mean, if we take 1945 as the beginning of the nuclear age, today, after nearly 70 years, nuclear technology is a far more mature technology. In 1960s, when the NPT was being negotiated, you didn't have concepts called threshold state. You didn't have a concept called lead time. When the JCPOA with Iran was being negotiated, people were calculating that if we put this restriction or that restriction, we increase the lead time from 2 months or 3 months to 18 months or 24 months. These kind of concepts didn't exist at that time. So basically, the definitions that exist in the NPT have become out of date. And that's the reason why they no longer will not serve future proliferation concerns, because future proliferation concerns will take place in a different technological environment. And that brings me to the point that I had made earlier. Therefore, the NPT has become a victim of its own success. It has reached as far as it could go in terms of getting the adherence that it could get. It can't go any further because its definitions are arbitrary, and it can't tackle future proliferation threats because its definitions are out of date in terms of a technology which is today a 70-year-old technology.
Mr. Kim, what would be your response to what Rakesh said about the...
Again, I will pick up last point Rakesh made with your request to comment on nuclear security. And I think it is a very good transition from Rakesh's point. I mean, I fully agree with you that the NPT has to be complemented and updated so that it can adapt to the changing reality, including technological advances. And lowering threshold is a real issue because when I look at future proliferation challenges, I think we have to look at non-state actors, but non-state actors to be aided by possibly some state actors or rogue elements in the state sector. So I think now we have to look at proliferation challenges in a wider context, looking at nuclear security, material security, but also nuclear terrorism. And the membership of Nuclear Terrorism Convention is disappointingly low. Although NPT reaches its near universality, but the Nuclear Terrorism Convention called ICSENT is stays roughly only half of the member states. And I think we have to do more to fill that gap, both in normative and operational senses, because of lowering threshold and increasing risks of the collusion between state and non-state actors. We, international community, must guard against these increasing risks and threats. That's the first point. Regarding the overall state of play in the context of NPT review process, because of the success we have in addressing proliferation challenges, the consensus level of state parties to NPT about non-proliferation section is very high and strong. Even on Iran, DPRK, although everybody recognizes it is still a lot of challenges remaining, but there is a very strong consensus. So as far as review process is concerned, I don't see this section will impact review outcome as much as it does on other issues like nuclear disarmament or Middle East free zone issue.
Ambassador Abe, last year I think you talked about low-hanging fruits that could be picked very easily. So what's happened to these fruits?
The low-hanging fruit was CTBT, but still lying there. It's ready to be picked up, but hasn't been. I think there were some views expressed that the NPT, such thing as NPT, has come close to the end of its life.
No.
Or has limits of it, right.
Not
but
the end of its life.
the fact is, the NPT is cornerstone, but a lot of things have to be done outside of it to help it achieve its goals. U.S.-Russia negotiations outside the NPT, but it has achieved to a certain extent the disarmament objectives. Iran negotiation, well, strictly speaking, it's outside. But basically, NPT is a non-proliferation treaty. It has to achieve its goal. Cat has to catch mouse. And without catching mouse, people don't believe NPT's utility. In that sense, Iran was a case. I think the JCPOA plan of action is a good accomplishment. It has to give a chance to succeed. And in order to succeed, it will be very difficult to have a chance to succeed if it's done under very contentious circumstances. One side accusing Iran is not doing it or doing something behind. The other side said, no, this is our right, and so on and so. It should be done in as friendly circumstances as possible for it to succeed. After 10, 15 years of implementation period, you will find out. The other question is Korean Peninsula. Here we have more serious question. North Korea has left the treaty under dubious circumstances, but as mentioned, the conference has not even been able to define whether it is within the treaty or outside the treaty. That is a situation. But the question here is how to achieve denuclearization of Korean Peninsula peacefully. I underline the word peacefully. To do so, basically, you have to go through negotiations. Oh, by the way, the Security Council resolutions, number of them, provide indeed sanctions, provide encouragement of negotiations. But don't forget, the core of the resolution is prohibition that North Korea should not conduct nuclear tests, should not conduct ballistic missile tests, right? So don't forget about that. And those paragraphs have not been complied with. Well, anyway, we have tried negotiations many times already, more than 20 years. Rewards have been offered. Security guarantees have been offered. Diplomatic, political recognitions have been offered, but they have not succeeded. Every time they ended up in disillusionment. The idea is coming up that the new round of negotiations should be conducted. The question here is how to avoid Charlie Brown's fate. You may have read Peanuts comic strips. There's a mischievous girl called Lucy holding a football here. Charlie Brown, come, run, and kick the ball. I'll hold it for you. Every time she pulls a ball and Charlie Brown flips over in the air. Every time he thinks, this time she must be honest. Let's try again. How can we avoid that failure? This is a big challenge. I think people can come up with a good idea.
Hold the bell.
Another point was made that NPT has exhausted. Indeed, it needs a modernization. One important element of modernization is what is called additional protocol, very technical term. Essentially, it was born out of the failure of Iraqi verification, or some from North Korean verification. Basically, the old system is to go and check the facilities. The country has said, these are our facilities. Please come and have a look. But it turned out Iraqi was doing something else behind in other places. So the additional protocol provides opportunities for inspectors to go to the places other than the ones who have been presented. And also they have very strong tool. They can swipe the table, ground, take samples. In today's technology, with the samples, you can find out minute amount of radioactive material. With that, you have a very strong tool to uncover hidden activities. So in today's context, such thing as additional protocol should be made mandatory to all the countries. Unfortunately, Review Conference has not succeeded in agreeing to make it mandatory. I think they should do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You talked about the importance of the Middle Eastern zone, free of weapons of mass destruction. And then you also talked about the importance of Russia and the U.S. engaging in arms control and further arms control negotiations. You also raised the issue of non-state actors. All these are related to our security issues, in fact. So when we talk about the NPT, we kind of talk about the NPT-related issue, and then there are some security issues out there that somebody needs to resolve, as if there were some people out there who would be dealing with the security issues. But if we, as members of the NPT, I wonder if we should be doing pressuring more the U.S. and Russia to proceed with further with the arms control negotiations, and also suggest some resolution in the security situation in the Middle East, maybe, without which I don't think that any zone will happen, and tackling with the issues of terrorism. I think that is one role that the NPT member states should be assuming in order to advance the non-proliferation and disarmament. What your reaction would be to this security, general security, and regional and international security environment in order to advance the goals of the NPT?
Yes. Looking back into the history, say the INF Treaty succeeded. U.S.-Russia SALT treaties were signed. They came out not from vacuum. There were very strong popular concern about the threat of nuclear weapons actually being used. SALT were started during the heyday of Cold War, when people were afraid that one day U.S. and Soviet Union may start exchanging hundreds of nuclear bombs against each other, and people may be decimated. INF Treaty came strong fear among the people in Europe that Russian, Soviets, and U.S. are deploying medium-range, intermediate-range ballistic missiles, and they may be sacrificed in the future. Then there was a very strong popular movement demanding the political leaders come to agreements. So in today's context, I think it is important for us to make the people aware of the danger of a nuclear confrontation, still existing even after the end of the Cold War, and start moving the people that we won't have actions from the top political leaders of the United States, Russia, China, and other countries. That, politicians are political animals. They don't just do good things out of a vacuum. They do something, sometimes forced to do so when there's a very strong popular movement. So it is a task for the disarmament experts, for the NGOs, to start mobilizing this public opinion.
Global security environment, again, is very troubling, and tensions are rising, and divisions is deepening. So it doesn't look good. But I don't agree with the view that because of bad security environment, it's not the right time to do disarmament, pursue disarmament or arms control. Because even at the height of the Cold War, the two leaders of two biggest nuclear possessors managed to agree on arms control measures, and those measures in turn contribute to improving security climate. So, so we have to turn the logic in favor of disarmament or arms control measures to be taken up front as confidence building measures for improving security environment. That applies to also Middle East. Because if we wait for security environment in the Middle East to be ripe for achieving Middle East free zone of WMD, it will never happen. So there we have to find a way how to encourage the parties in the region to move toward disarmament and arms control. And there I'd like to comment on Ambassador Abe's earlier point on low-hanging fruits. Because now we are talking about Middle East free zone of WMD. It is not just limited to nuclear. And now that Syria promised to abandon chemical weapons program, why Israel cannot join Chemical Weapons Convention, and if Israel joins, why Egypt cannot join CWC. And also on CTBT, as Ambassador Abe said, now Iran commits to, through JCPOA, to remain peaceful in their pursuit of a nuclear program. Why Iran cannot ratify CTBT? And if Iran ratifies, then why Israel cannot do it?
Why aren't they? Why?
I mean, so those are the questions.
Yeah.
We have to ask them, and we have to encourage them to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I very much welcome Ambassador Shah's comment on also the significance of CTBT. And I also want to encourage China to ratify CTBT. If China does it, I think India will have one less reason not to do it. And then Pakistan will have one less reason not to do it. So those are the low-hanging fruits. I really want to encourage all of us to these countries. And there, I think we have to cultivate the alliance and coalition, not only with the government officials, but also civil society network, as we have APLN, but also with parliamentarians. They have to tell. And also people have to remind their senators, their parliamentarians, to press their governments to act. So my plea on CTBT as a low-hanging fruit is not to wait for others to move first. You have to be the first mover. And then it will unlock and it will create chain reaction, positive chain reaction by others.
Thank you. You know, if it was such an attractive low-hanging fruit, then everybody would not be waiting for everybody else to go and grab it. So I think, but let me, to address your point. See, as Wonsu said, we have had 9 review conferences of the NPT. 4 times it failed to get a final document or declaration or outcome. And 5 times it did. Okay. Out of the 5 times, if we take out 1995 review conference, there were 4 final documents, all of which have language on Middle East and WMD and free zone and things like that. Nothing has happened. So I don't think that is low-hanging fruit. The 5th, the 1995 conference, is actually the only one which adopted a decision. And that decision was the indefinite and unconditional extension. Now, by doing that, in a sense, we understand, and I think it is quite clear, that the NPT has certain shortcomings. But when we extended it indefinitely and unconditionally, well, unfortunately, we also extended indefinitely and unconditionally the shortcomings of the NPT. So now it becomes much more difficult for us to find a way to strengthen it, or because earlier it was as if whatever were the successes, you could keep them by standing still. Today, you can't hope to keep the NPT merely by standing still, because there are other initiatives that are taking place. So you need to keep running a little bit. You know, the NPT states parties need to keep moving a little bit if they want to sustain whatever the successes of the NPT that have been registered. And that's where the challenge is. And some of this fruit doesn't really appear to be that low-hanging. Otherwise, we will find that other initiatives will take political momentum. And I think that is going to be the big thing. Meanwhile, there are, of course, other threats as have been identified. The North Korea issue, we've talked about that at length, both here and in other meetings. And I think the JCPOA is a major concern, because given the overall political environment and the relationship, the U.S. is undertaking, even though the U.S. has said that Iran is in full compliance with the JCPOA, they have still announced a review of their Iran policy. And if they take a hard line, and through a combination of various circumstances, last year, U.S. and Iranian vessels in the Persian Gulf had 16 incidents. They got resolved because Secretary Kerry and Foreign Minister Zarif had a communication channel which had been established through the process of negotiations, and they kept it going. There was one occasion where they were able to resolve an issue by having about 4 conversations in the space of 12 hours. Now, that kind of communication no longer exists. So today, if you have actually some kind of a set of circumstances where de-escalation measures are not possible because of lack of communication, then I'm afraid you will see strain on the JCPOA. And if that happens, then it becomes very difficult to see how Iran will not comply with the JCPOA unilaterally. What will the other countries, because JCPOA is not bilateral merely between the US and Iran, it's a P5+1 and Iran. So I think we are seeing many more challenges in the run-up to 2020 in order for 2020 to even have the modest success which we call a final document. I mean, it's also a question of how we define a success. And as Wonsu said, it's an outcome. And we've seen 4 such outcomes. So even if we set our sights very modestly and say we want only an outcome, I think a lot more needs to be done to ensure that.
Madam Chair, I noticed that a civil war has started among ourselves. Well, I think I welcome it.
As long as it's
That makes we have some job to do, right? Let me comment on your comment, one by one. First, on the indefinite extension of this NPT, 1995, that is extended indefinitely by consensus. That many countries, minus India, Pakistan, Israel, all of them said yes, indefinitely, unconditionally. And why they did this? Why they did this? Because they all believe that's in the interest of them. None of them is stupid. So, I agree with you, my friend, that there are some weaknesses. And through this indefinite extension, the weaknesses have been also indefinitely consolidated. I can understand.
That's all.
That is a problem. Now, how to solve it? My friend Wang Sung Kim said that let's update it. Then this means what? Let us read this NPT treaty once again. There is a provision of amendment. And there, if I'm not wrong, I stand to be corrected, that we can work out some protocol as additional protocol to this. I don't know if it is there. But because we are really, if we want to, we all decide to update it, amend it, I don't know what will be the outcome. There could be a chaos or disaster. Of course, there is possibility to all agree with amendment to accommodate countries like India and Pakistan. That said, well, this is an issue we really have to, we don't run away from this issue. Either update it, this NPT, improve it, to make it, to meet the reality, to match the reality. This is one. Another, at the same time, after the South Asian nuclear explosions by India and then Pakistan, there is a Security Council resolution 1172. And one day, 24 hours before that, there is P5 Foreign Minister's statement. I think we should have another look, at least that Security Council Resolution 1172. I always claim that I drafted because China was the chair. But now, you know what have happened ever since then. So while having another look or updating the NPT, we should have another look at Security Council 172. And I'm not a lawyer, I don't have legal background. I have been told many, many times, Security Council resolution has a legal effect. Particularly, on security or the kind of issues. Is it true or not? If it's true, then we need another Security Council resolution to overthrow the previous, make the previous Security Council resolution null and void. This is another legal issue.
No, but this was not Chapter 7.
Okay, but let's do it.
So it's not legally binding.
Not legally binding, okay, even political binding. But if it's a political binding, let's have another politically binding Security Council resolution to undo it, the previous one. So it's my loud thinking, comments on the comments. Another one, it's ridiculous. I don't know, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that as a state party to an NPT. It says that there are countries who exploded the nuclear devices before the year 1970 are legal, are nuclear weapon countries. So by NPT, India, Pakistan not illegal countries. By NPT, let me emphasize this. So we have countries, nuclear have several categories. Number one, legal, the P5. Illegal by NPT, India, Pakistan. Israel, used to be called threshold, but there is no legal provision to define it as threshold or whatever. That's the popular view. Then now we have Korea. I don't know where it is. It was a member of NPT, then suspended its membership, and there's no legal ground for any suspension of membership. I don't know, I'm not a lawyer anyway. And then again, it's withdrew. So then on the Korea issue, we have another Security Council resolution. This is almost also political.
Chapter 7. This one is binding.
This is binding. Okay, yeah. Okay. This is binding. Now it's legal. Okay.
Well, so, you are a P5 member.
So P5 member, as a permanent member of Security Council, we do need to comply with all political, or binding or non-binding the Security Council resolutions. So we have at least four categories of nuclear weapon countries. Let's I don't know the English word, unify them. Work out the definition. What is a nuclear power country? Okay. So this is the area we have to work. Another country, another problem my dear colleague from Japan mentioned, that on the North Korea issue, we need a new, you said good ideas. Good ideas are there. Security Council resolution, peaceful settlement. At least China has come up with one. 2 suspensions. Suspension of nuclear testing and missile testing by North Korea, and suspension of the military exercises conducted by United States together with South Korea. Okay, South Korea. So imagine, without this no suspension, if you continue your exercises, don't expect North Korea to suspend their nuclear missile testing. It's impossible. So this is workable. It's a good idea. Agreed already, or also as early as 1996, I think. Somebody reminded me here. The second idea is 2-track idea. Once the 2 suspensions have been realized, agreed upon, then we can start negotiating, talking to each other through whatever form. Because 60-party talks was chaired by China, and we did not succeed, and people say, you Chinese have no impact, no influence, you are useless. That's why the long paper yesterday I read, China is useless. Let's let the United States and South Korea to solve the nuclear issue. God bless you. Okay, we congratulate you, your success in advance, right? No, anyway, because it's not China created the nuclear issue, North Korea. Okay, so 2 tracks are absolutely necessary. Once we achieved these 2 suspensions, then we can start negotiations on 2 tracks. 1 track on denuclearization by DPRK, while at the same time to another track on the transition from the cessation of the arms treaty into a peace treaty. Don't forget, United Nations Security Council many, almost 60 or 70 years ago agreed on this. DPRK is still legally at war with United Nations.
United States.
Led by United States. And China was not a member to UN at that time. Okay? So DPRK is there. It's at war with the United Nations. So let's do it. Address this issue. Don't run away from it. It's a reality. So those are the 2 tracks. So in response to my colleague of Japan, I said, we have good ideas there. Those ideas were endorsed, as a matter of fact, as early as 1996 by all 6 parties. So good ideas anyway, because the China's idea, the idea of the 6, and agreed by North Korea. Okay, we picked up them. Those are, we can work on them. I think that I have that much to say and comment. CTBT, okay, you have a lot of, P5. It's easy to find the problems because the world is imperfect. No treaty is perfect. But let me say security environment, I think on the whole is excellent. Security environment is good. Why good? We have not seen the Third World War for the last 70 more years. There's no big clash between big powers exchanging nuclear weapons. So this, on the whole, we have seen the globalization. We have seen the faster development in science and economy and technology, right? So globally speaking, we have enjoying peace. So environment is good, relatively speaking. But on issues like Korea, on issues like the Middle East, yes, we need to improve those I call it miniature environment. And in a lot of, otherwise, if we are not cautious, it may lead to bigger problems. I'm sorry, it's my personal view, okay? You don't need to agree. I may not represent speaking on behalf of China. That's the way I look at issues, Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador Shah. And why don't we ask John to comment on the last challenge, which is the security environment, before we open it to the audience?
Okay, Tuya, thank you. I'll try and get back to the question of the NPT, if I may.
Yeah, in relation to the NPT.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, understood. And I think the point that Wan Su made is absolutely opposite here. I mean, the global situation clearly is not optimal by any means. However, that's exactly the time when you really want to do what can be done to strengthen the frameworks you've got and perhaps to evolve them. And so it is exactly turning things on its head. You can't wait till things are peaceful. There'll never be the ideal time to get the agreement. So I think that international situation is, in a way, therefore, in taking it from that perspective, conducive to a success in 2020. But it is true that expectations of the NPT have grown and grown, and I would take issue with Ambassador Sood on this point, because I think the expectation that Article 6 itself was going to resolve all global issues, and don't forget, it's not just that all NPT parties have a responsibility on nuclear disarmament, they have responsibility for complete and general disarmament. If you want to read the full text of the article, Not many people do want to read the full text of the article because it becomes even less achievable. But the point of the full text of the article is a recognition built into that. You can't just simply take the nuclear away and deal with it in isolation. It doesn't work that way, and you know more than anybody else it doesn't work that way. So anyway, the Article 6 has a provision which countries have been trying to implement over the decades outside of the NPT framework and involving countries whether or not members of the NPT. And so when we put the list of achievements in that Article 6 context, it's not improper to talk about the CWC as an additional element of that overall international community's response to Article 6. On the question of NPT standing still, I think that's absolutely wrong. I have to say also, I think the NPT, particularly if you use the broader expression, the NPT regime, the things that have been added on over the decades, it has been a remarkably flexible instrument, amazingly flexible instrument. And as to adjusting some of the parameters, yes, and that's been happening. Some parameters have been adjusted, and they will continue to be adjusted over time. As for 2020 itself, I think the point was made that 2015 was a failure. Yes, it was a failure. We didn't have a final document, but can't we be a bit more sophisticated about what we call success and what we call failure? The documents of all the documents, apart from one, were agreed by consensus. Absolutely remarkable achievement if you think of it that way. And this gets back to a more fundamental question. Can the global system operate by consensus? It's obviously very difficult when it's required to, extremely difficult. And it enables one country or a small group of countries to turn victory into defeat.
Okay.
So I suggest we be more flexible about how we go about these review conferences in 2020, look at ways to get out of this all or nothing logjam. 1995, there was 2 documents. We could look at more than one document. We could look at separating out if we wanted to make something of the 50th anniversary, we could look at a 50th anniversary statement separate from the other omnibus outcome. That'd be one way of breaking that logjam. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, all the panelists. And I don't think we will have time for questions from the audience. I'm sorry about that, but thank you very much. And why don't we give a round of applause to our panelists?